All right, and I'd invite you to take your Bible. Let's go to the book of Proverbs, chapter 19. Think about some more verses here. Excited about what we have tonight. Earlier today, I was kind of going over what we covered last week, and much to my chagrin, I discovered we only covered 4 verses. I don't really know how that's possible. Seriously, because like the first 2 verses, I felt like were kind of a repeat of some of the stuff from the previous week, so I know I didn't spend a lot of time on them. I guess, I was quite ashamed of myself when I saw that. But we're going to go for at least 5 or 6 verses tonight. That's the plan. So just quickly, by way of review, just to kind of take a run and start at what we have for us tonight. We did begin last week in verse number 8. And just thought about the process and talked about the process of getting wisdom. And really the activity of our life ought to be geared to amassing wisdom in our life. It ought to be a goal of us. It's not ought to be something that we think is going to happen by, would osmosis be an appropriate word there? Just that kind of that passing through without any pressure type deal. That's not the way that wisdom comes to us. This needs to be an active pursuit on our part. In verse number 8, it quantifies that in a positive by saying you love your own soul, you find good. And I don't really think that you find or that you seek wisdom and things of that nature necessarily for that intended effect. In my opinion, finding wisdom, understanding, knowledge is its own reward, right? And those are just beneficial side effects to it that are quite nice, if I might add, right? Those are things we ought to be wanting. Verse number 9, again, kind of a reiteration of, I think it's verse number 5, yes. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. We just talked about the idea that there's consequences for the choices that you make. I like to say it's a free country. You can do whatever you want, right? Generally speaking. But the fact is there's going to be consequences for when you do whatever you want, right? Like, it's not you can't do whatever you want and nothing bad is going to happen to you. You tell lies, you're going to be punished. And I would argue that this was an escalation of verse number 5 where it talked about shall not escape. He added to it here in verse number 9, shall perish, right? Most of the time when you do things that you know are wrong, and this is a very basic concept of what's right and wrong, that there's a high price to pay for that. You don't get to do that with impunity. Spent a few minutes in verse number 10 talking about how the world operates better when people are in the right place and operating where they can succeed at. It's kind of a ongoing debate between myself and some of the guys at work. Are foremen, is it nature or nurture with foremen, right? Can you create a good foreman, or do some people have it and some people don't, right? And we can talk about it later, right? I'll just say, but when it comes to this right there, it matters who's in positions of authority, and it matters who's calling shots, and some people are not qualified for it. Maybe you can teach some of it, but sometimes you can't. And then I think we spent quite a bit of time in verse 11. I'm pretty sure that's the case. And we just talked about learning to get over things, right? And the very fact that we're told to pass over things, it's a man's discretion and all of that. Listen, life is full of things we're going to have to get over, right? And legitimate things you have to get over. That's just kind of part of interacting with one another. I'm not saying that what they did is right. I'm just saying you got to get over it, right? That's really the call upon us there. That brings us to verse number 12, where we're going to start thinking about it from the phrase or the concept, the point of view, if you will, that's probably better, of on power. Look at verse number 12 with me as we pick up into some new territory. The Bible says, the king's wrath is as the roaring of a lion, but his favor is as the dew upon the grass. And I was thinking about this just kind of in the context of nature, and some things are not to be messed with, right? It uses the illustration line. Has anybody not seen the video of that buffalo going after that guy and flipping him into the air? I don't remember. I'm sure it was up by Yellowstone somewhere if I was excluded. And I don't even think the guy was antagonizing it, right? The video I saw wasn't. And that buffalo basically stood up and went right after the guy. Got a video of the guy flying through the air and everything. I'm like, hey, you don't mess with that type of animal, right? I don't know what the whole thing was. So as much as you shouldn't mess with the buffalo, I've heard they're pretty ornery creatures, right? I don't know that for a fact. That's what I've heard. It's because we killed all their buddies back in the 1860s, right? I'd be ornery too, right? But at any rate, but even if you think about it from that perspective, a lion is even worse, right? So it's using a lion here. The king's wrath is as the roaring of a lion. And I've never seen a lion in the wild, right? I've seen them in captivity. I don't think I've ever heard a lion roar in person. But I just kind of put myself in that place. Like, if I heard a lion roar, I think that would make me thankful there were 3 inches of glass between me and the lion, right? Right? Like, I'm thankful for that. I feel like that would be something that humans have cultivated the wisdom to know this is not a good thing, right? This is a negative here. And so it uses that kind of common consensus. And nobody ever told me that when a lion roars, you should be careful, right? I've never once had that told to me, right? It's just like you hear that and you're like, that, that's probably not a good thing, right? And so I think that there's a level of common sense, if I could use that term here with that. And he carries it, or he begins with this concept of the king's wrath. And so when we think about the king's wrath, number one, we're thinking about somebody in power, somebody that has control, somebody that has influence, somebody that, when I think of a king, gets his way, essentially, right? It's kind of rules with carte blanche and can kind of do anything he's won. And the principle here is don't make people in power mad at you, right? This is a good principle to have in your life. Let me caveat it, so that way I don't spend the whole time thinking, don't you know, in Acts it says you ought to obey God rather than man. I understand that. This is nothing I say is to be implied, inferred, or implicit that I'm doing anything against that. What I'm saying is, generally speaking, if somebody's in charge of you, has authority over you, can tell you what to do, controls your paycheck, has been set over you by God-given authority, you should probably try to not make them roar. We have to ask ourselves the question, well, what would make a lion roar? What would make a king angry? I think I got 3 words. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Disobeying them. Disobedience. Nobody in authority likes to be disobeyed. And one thing we have to understand a lot of times is most of the time you're just better off just doing what you're told, right? You can argue points, and I'm not talking about fringe cases. I'm just talking about rules for life. You should just do what you're told when somebody in authority does it. Otherwise, you're liable to find out why the lion roars. So disrespect, you should respect people in authority over you. At bare minimum, you should, maybe the term would be to respect the office that they hold, even if you don't necessarily respect the person. Listen, you don't have to think your boss is a good person to do what your boss says. That's really not the dynamic that's set up in most cases. Like, you only have to do what this person says with a respectful attitude and obey them if you think that they're a good person to listen to. That it's more like this is your boss, do what they say, right? And you'll find your life much better if you just learn to do it. And then also disregarding them. That probably could fall under disobedience, but it feels like a little bit more egregious to me, right? It's knowing what they want, don't do it. And he says, the king's wrath is as the roaring of a lion. Basically, trouble is coming for you, right? My guess is if you were out in I imagine all lions live in Serengetis. I don't know if that's the place, but if you're out on the Serengeti and you hear a lion roar, your natural inclination, unless you're Steve Irwin level type guy, is to go the opposite direction, right? This is danger. So when you see the king getting angry, when somebody in authority is getting angry, your inclination should be, what can I do to distance myself and diminish what's going on here? That's called good common sense, and that's what he's arguing here. It says, but his favor is the dew upon the grass. And I was thinking about dew upon the grass. I don't know if what we have with humidity is considered dew. It feels a lot more aggressive than that, but let's just assume that that's what it is. That's like what I would argue one of the most gentle ways to water something, right? Jacob talked about the rain this morning. It was raining pretty good. I don't know if you probably drove through. It was rain, I'm talking like driving 40 miles an hour in a 65 level rain type deal and hoping everybody else is, right? It was coming down. And kind of to contrast that, I also found that to be a very aggressive way to water the grass, right? Like this is raining. But dew is just, I'm going to use the term, it's just natural. I'm not trying to get into the scientific aspect of it, but it just kind of appears. It's just there. It's just like on things. Sometimes it's so dewy here, you can hear it dripping off of the trees, right? Like this is a high level of dew that's going on here, right? And it's gentle and it's nice, and that's the way the king's favor is. That's nice. I've never walked anywhere and saw dew on something and thought it looked pretty. I've seen pictures. I've just never seen it in person, right? Because it bespeaks of humidity to me, right? So it's not very pretty. But it says his favor is the dew upon the grass. It brings nourishment and life, and it's a good thing. This is a verse that's really not giving you a rule to follow as much as a guideline to keep in the back of your mind. Be careful about how you respond to people in authority, because they can either bring lion roaring or the dew of the rain into your life. It matters the way that we respond to it. Be careful. Be careful who you make mad. I think that I can say generally speaking, you ought not to be making people mad, period. Like that, it kind of should be like one of your life goals. But if you have a limited number of life goals left, people that are in authority should be definitely on that. And I think really what this verse is telling us, that the effect of a king in your life is largely up to you. You get to kind of dictate how people in authority respond to you. Proverbs 20 puts it like this: the fear of the king is as the roaring of a lion. Whoso provoketh him to anger sinneth against his own soul, right? Like you're doing this to yourself. Proverbs 16:14 says, the wrath of a king is as messengers of death, but a wise man will pacify it, right? Listen, you ought to go out of your way to keep people in authority happy with you. Ecclesiastes, it's not in Proverbs, but it's written likely by Solomon as well. It says, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes if you'll just back off, you can go a long way in doing that. And so really the question we need to ask ourselves before we move on to verse number 13 is, how are you interacting with people in authority over you? And honestly, your life is going to be dictated, how good your life is, how you're interacting with people like that. Verse number 13, let's think about calamity in our life. It says, a foolish son is the calamity of his father, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. Let's define a few words here. The word calamity means disaster, ruin, misery, or deep trouble. It's trouble that brings grief and damage. Calamity is misery with consequences. Let me define contentions while we're right here. It's quarrels, strife, dispute, or repeated conflicts. We'll come back to that in a minute. This idea of continual dropping, a constant dripping leak. But let's start with the first part of this verse. A foolish son is the calamity of his father. I think one thing that's helpful for us to just kind of acknowledge this is a calamity, right? When a son is foolish, this is let me make sure I get this is a disaster that is causing me ruin, misery, and deep trouble. This is, there's this reality, right? Accepting things a lot of times will help you cope with it, right? And I think there's a few things about this. If you are a son and or daughter, don't cause your parents this kind of grief. Listen, you don't have to agree with everything your parents think and believe and all of that. Listen, kids grow up in church and don't go to church anymore. There's going to always be a level of calamity just by the nature of that. But I have yet to see a child that had the ability to not agree with his parents and not be very mean about it. Listen, if you don't want to agree with your parents, I think that's foolish on your part, but you don't have to be cruel and insensitive and mean to who they are in your life. Because it's bad enough that somebody close to them is making poor decisions and things that the parent doesn't agree with. It's another thing if the kid is being disrespectful and mean through the entire process. Again, people are going to do what they're going to do. I'm not advocating for kids not listening to their parents and kind of throwing out everything their parents says. But if you're going to have to do it, do you have to be cruel in the process? And that causes calamity to a father. And I would argue God holds children accountable for that. The Bible does say, one of the commandments, the fourth or fifth, honor thy father and thy mother. It doesn't necessarily say you always have to agree with them. It doesn't say that in that context you have to obey everything, but you always should be honoring your parents, and you always ought to be responding to them in the way that is pleasing to God. Also, I would argue here, and I don't think this is by accident, said the foolish son is the calamity of his father. This is the worst thing that happens to parents when their kids behave in such a way. When kids are foolish, this is the calamity of it. And as a parent, it's like kids disappoint you. I think that probably can tend to happen hither and yon. But really the response is, how are you going to respond to the calamity in your life? You kind of need to accept it there. And then we see the second part of the verse, and the contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. It's really just this idea of a woman that can't be told anything. I thought about this. Okay, so this is an interesting verse that we're going to have to think about here. And I thought, well, what if a woman came to him and be like, I don't understand why he says these type of things about women. Okay, well, if you thought that, then let me give you an example. You could go back, if that was your thought, you could go back to verse 1, and it says he, verse 2, he, verse 3, man and his, verse 4, his, verse 5, he, verse 6, him, verse 7, brethren, him, his, him, his, verse 8, his, he, verse 9, he, verse 11, man, his, verse 12, king, his, verse 13, where we're already at, son and father. Does anybody recognize anything about all of those pronouns generally? They're all male. So if we go through, and that's kind of Proverbs in general, right? It's always the guys, this, the man. And there could be some gender ambiguity in a lot of that. But what I'm saying is if you're a woman and you get to this verse, say, why is he always picking on women like this? Did you read the last 11 verses? You probably fit the bill. Verse number 11, if that is your thought on this. And so, because you're already approaching it with a contentious attitude. And that's probably, you're missing the point here. Can't be told anything. So let me kind of clarify. This is not merely a wife having an opinion. You ought to marry a woman that has opinions. You ought to marry somebody whose opinions you value. It's not merely a wife raising a concern or even disagreeing with her husband. The word points to a pattern of strife, the kind of repeated arguing that wears down the peace of a home. This idea of a continual dropping. It's a constant dripping leak. It's not the fact that it's big that makes it bad. It's the fact that it's continual and just never is incessant and never lets up. So listen, women, it's really hard to sugarcoat who we're talking to here. If you argue every point, if you make everything an issue, if you refuse to let everything go, you are like a gray, drizzling day, week, month, year, life. That's what the Bible says. And if you are like that, your husband probably will not tell you that it's like that in his life, but it is like that in his life. And we're all familiar. February can be a month in the year where it's hard to get a day of sunshine, right? I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but like you can go weeks in February and the sun hardly never come out. And I find that to, if you just have a gray, drizzly day, I find that to be on a very low level, kind of like a depressing day, right? It's like I got rained out on Monday. We got sent home on Monday. Did y'all get sent home too, right? Got sent home on Monday, and you got home, and it was raining, it was gray, and it's like, I just don't want to do nothing. This is just the worst day ever in the history of the universe. And gray days can have that, discouraging. A gray day, you know what, the gray days, what are they blocking out? The sun, right? So a woman who is contentious is literally blocking the sun out of her husband or her man's life. Like every day should be a sunny day, and you're like Eeyore, right? I don't know if everybody's watched Eeyore. It's just like a gray cloud walking around. And Eeyore wasn't really contentious, so that's not really what I'm talking about. It's just depressing, right? It's like, you're making me depressed by the way that you're doing it. And so if you're always locked in mortal combat with your man, with your husband, you are the problem. I'll say it again. If you're always locked in mortal combat with your husband, you are the problem. You say, well, he's wrong about all of this. Okay, well, that means, let me say this. Well, that means you did a bad job of picking a husband then. You picked a man that was wrong about everything. Okay, so now you have two choices. You can accept his wrongness and learn to live with it, or you can be a continual dropping in a rainy day. You realize that nobody picked your husband but you. Like, we don't live in a world where husbands are being picked by we're not marrying each other for economic alliances, right? They're not being set up by religious tribunals, right? Generally speaking, 99 times, you get to marry whoever you want. And if all you can do is argue with the person, you did a bad job of picking, and you're always saying, well, he this and he that, and he's wrong about this, and he may be. It's not even arguing whether he's right. Just arguing that he won't let anything. He's just arguing, right? That's the problem. You realize the man was probably happy before he met you, right? And you brought grayness and constant conflict into his life. And now he comes home to a gray sky. And you say, well, this is pretty harsh towards women. I'd like, sit down and hold on. It gets worse from here in some other verses, right? This is a kind of constant repetitive. And listen, you can think of what you want. There's a few things about this. Solomon probably knew what he was talking about, right? And I base that upon the fact that he probably had every kind of wife possible, right? From a very good one to the worst of the worst. And so he had wide range of experience. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just observing it. Number two, I don't remember number two. Number one was so amazing. I guess we'll just leave it at number one, right? So we have somebody that's speaking from experience here that says the contentions of a wife are continually dropping. And as a wife, you should be careful about basically bringing gray skies into your husband's life. The reality is men are fighting the world in one sense. Not maybe the way that we used to, but men are going out and engaging with the world, and they don't want to come home and fight you. They don't want to do that. And most things, listen, women have to be, here's what I was going to say. Most of Proverbs is written in the masculine, written to the masculine. Again, I'm not saying that's completely exclusive of everybody. I think we can all take application. But a lot of times when it narrows in on a woman, it's this subject. So take that as it will, but probably there's something to be said for that. So men don't want to have to fight you. And so don't argue and have contentions and fights about everything between you and your husband. The reality is you have to be careful about this, because you could say, because what I'm going to tell you is most things don't matter. Most things don't matter. Most arguments are not over serious things, right? Especially if it's constant argument. This is not, if you're having constant arguments over theology and child rearing and like you've genuinely made poor choices in marriage, and everybody's going to suffer from that. But most of the time, this continual dropping, this is over insignificant things that don't matter. And if a woman is thinking, well, if they're insignificant, why does he? You're missing the point of Proverbs 19:13. The contentions of a wife are a continual dropping. I'll give you a few of them. We'll be there in a couple of weeks on some of them, but Proverbs 21:9 says it like that: it is better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. Proverbs 27:15, a continual dropping in a very rainy day and a contentious woman are alike. We're only a couple of chapters, but at the rate we're going, it's going to be 6 months before I get there. So I'll mention it about Proverbs 21 here. I don't know. I cannot make a statistical argument for this. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to use the term opinion. That probably understates what I think about this. That everybody's heard of let me see if I can pull out what I'm looking for. In a lot of guys' house, there's a place that's reserved for men. And it's two words, and it is a man. Okay, right. So everybody's generally aware of this concept. And what I've determined, and I actually did a slight amount of research for this, is man caves came about on almost the exact time that the feminist movement came about. And you can draw from that what you will. Again, men have always had garages, but this whole concept of a man cave type deal, listen, you know why men live in caves, right? Right? This is not really a positive running to that. And so, listen, women, women more than probably they even realize get to dictate the tenor of a house that they live in. And so it's up to you, to the best of your ability. It's up to you, period, to the best of your ability or not, to do what you have to do to not have constant conflict in your home. What time is it? Okay. At the risk of getting too far afield, you realize the husband is the head of your home. So that means if there's a conflict, it's never that you can't push a point, but at some point you should just say, okay, this is kind of the role that we play here. And again, if you got a man that just completely is making all these bad decisions, that's really on you as much as anything, that you picked him, right? And so that doesn't mean that you get to spend the rest of your life fixing him. Most guys don't, I'm not going to say most guys don't need to be fixed. Probably all of us do a little bit. But most guys don't want to think that their wife's entire goal in life is to fix them, right? That's probably not going to go well for anyone. Verse number 14 on blessing. Houses and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. He may be kind of continuing this vein slightly here. Houses and riches are the inheritance of fathers, and a prudent wife is from the Lord. This word inheritance, you're probably familiar with it, a possession received from those who came before you. In this verse, it's referring mainly to material provision passed down through family, house, lands, goods, wealth, real estate, advantage, stability, right? It's something that your dad gives you, right? Your dad's passed off the scene. I think that most inheritances, generally speaking, are after your parents are gone, unless you're the prodigal son and demanding it up front. I don't really know if that counts as an inheritance at this point, but you understand what I'm saying here. Let's tie this to the second part of the verse where it talks about a prudent wife. The word prudent here means wise, discernible, sensible, governed by sound judgment. Prudent means wise enough to manage life well. And really what he's arguing here is, I think there's two concepts here. Your level, I want to state this carefully. Your level of inheritance, there's a sense in which that's, I don't want to use the term luck, but that's not really what I'm trying to say here. Your inheritance is a result of more than anything what your father has done, right? Because you generally didn't do anything for it. Your father has done this. But I think the contrast really is, you get your inheritance is going to largely be based upon how successful your dad is. You don't have a lot of control over that, but a good wife, that comes from God, right? Like this is we're completely out of any other category other than providence. And it's hard not to tie this back to the verse we just looked at. You'd always rather have a prudent wife than a contentious wife, right? Like if you're kind of thinking about the ideal wife, and you're like, and if you're not married, you ought to be thinking about that. Like, what kind of wife am I looking for? Otherwise, you're probably just going to get not what you're looking for, right? I mean, if anytime, and women can do this too when they're looking for a husband. What type of person are you looking for? Well, prudent is something that men are, I don't know if they're looking for, but they sort of need it, right? They need this in their life. And just wise, discerning, sensible, and governed by sound judgment. That ought to describe you. That ought to be your goal in life. And I would argue, this again, to tie it back to verse number 13, contentions always override prudence. Let me give you an example. Say, I'm a good wife, but everything is an argument. Well, you're not that good of a wife then, because everything should not be an argument. A good wife is more than having a clean house and dinner on the table when somebody gets home. Heather is really good about that, times it with between me and maybe Elisa getting home or whatever. I was going somewhere with that. Good job, Heather. I guess if something else, right? But it's more. But there's more to it than that, because there's a lot of guys that go home to a cooked meal every night who are miserable. They eat their cooked meal and they go out to their man cave because their wife has driven them there. So it is more than there. I would apply it like this to our lives. Fathers can set you up and wives can drag you down. And so it matters. You can't really control your father. You can't control what he leads to. Your father could be rich and not leave you anything. That's the way the ball bounces for you. But you get to control what kind of wife you had. A father can leave you a home, and a bad wife will ruin a home. Proverbs 18, we looked at it several months ago at this point, says it like this: whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. In Genesis, it says it like this: and the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a help meet for him. I feel like I've mentioned it recently, but I'll mention it here. You remember the first thing that the Bible talked about was not good, and that was man being alone. Man should not be alone. It's not the ideal way it's set up. Really, nobody should be alone. It talks about in Psalms that God has set the solitary in families. Doesn't mean you have to be married to have a family, just in general, but it does. It helps to create your own, I suppose, on some level, as far as that goes. Proverbs 14:1 says it like this: every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands. Well stated. Verse number 15, we see on laziness. Look at verse number 15. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. Slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep. This word slothfulness is a lazy unwillingness to do what duty requires. It's more than being tired. It's more than needing rest. It is a habit of avoiding labor, delaying responsibility, and refusing exertion. I used to work with a guy, I don't remember, it was a while back, and he told me, he said, I'm the late, and I actually considered him and thought, and would even still say he was a hard worker and, kind of a go-getter. And he He says, I'm the laziest hard worker you've ever met. He says, the only reason I work hard is so I don't get told what to do. He said, it's completely laziness on my part. He says, I do the bare minimum, the best I can to stay out of trouble, right? He said, I am so lazy, right? Well, I think there was a level of facetiousness there because I've seen lazy people and he was not one of them, right? And so what I'm saying is slothfulness is just unwilling to even do what's required. Listen, especially, let me apply this a little bit to men. We picked on women quite a bit today. Just because you get home don't mean your day is necessarily over if there are things. I don't probably do it as often as I should, but I don't even know if I want to say this now that I've gotten halfway down it, but I'll come home and say, hey, is there anything you need me to take care of tonight? Is there anything that you need done? Maybe on a Saturday, I'll be like, is there anything that you need done? And I'm like, oh, please don't say anything I don't want to do, right? And if she says it, I generally, I think I make a pretty big effort to do it, and don't ask her to verify that. That's my opinion on my effort level right there, right? But hey, listen, we have responsibilities, and it's more than just I get up and go to work every day. That's a pretty low bar for laziness. There are lazy people that get up and go to work every day, right? So that's not really the thing. This word in the second phrase, an idle soul shall suffer hunger. The word idle means inactive, negligent, unwilling to labor. It's not merely resting. Rest is okay. Idleness is when man avoids the work, duty, and responsibility that belong to him. Listen, be careful about being idle. Be careful about being slothful and just not taking care of it. You ever put something off forever and then you finally did it and you were embarrassed about how short and how little effort it took? Man, I'll give you an example in the negative for me. Like I have the back of my Yukon, it's got like an air compressor on it for some sort of air suspension. I don't really understand everything it's doing, but it went out. And I don't remember how I did it. But so I bought one on eBay, right? It's still expensive even used. I bought it on eBay and I looked at it. I looked up at it. I'm like, that doesn't look like that's not going to be fun at all. And I put it off for quite a while. Finally, I said, you know what? This whole weekend I'm dedicating to getting that changed. It took me like 7 minutes. right? It's but we have to be careful that we don't let those type of attitudes pervade every area of our life. Be careful about always putting off hard things. Most things are not that hard once you get started. I'm not saying nothing is, but most things are not that hard once you get started. It does talk about here, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep. You know, with a deep sleep, it's harder to get people out of it, right? I don't really know who determines what a deep sleep is or not. I'm not quite positive about that, but I think that it's still using the terminology that we're all at least familiar with or whatever. And he's saying when you're slothful, it's almost like a place that you get to that it's hard to come back from, right? You know, it's one thing if you're just kind of taking a nap, right? Just maybe relaxing in your easy chair and, what are you smiling about, Hannah, right? And just kind of, it's like, and you hear stuff that's going on and, my favorite thing would be watching something. We were watching something the other night. And we're like, we're going to stay up. It was the night I got rained out, wasn't working. So we'll stay up and finish it. And be like, y'all stay up all you want. I flip the chair back. I'll wake me up when it's over, right? Right. But you're still kind of aware of what's going on. You hear stuff being done. You're like, wait, what's happening? But if you're in a deep sleep, you could sleep through anything almost, right? And slothfulness kind of puts you in that deep. It's harder to come out of that, right? You ever been so dead asleep and got woken up that you don't even really know what year it is, right? You're just kind of stumbling around and can hardly walk, and you're literally like a fog and a fuzz, and you're like, that's what happens when I take a 5-minute nap. Well, you just may be walking around like that, right? But most of us, that's a deep slothfulness will take you down that kind of path. It says it casteth into a deep sleep. It says the idle soul. It doesn't say the idle person. It says the idle soul shall suffer hunger. I think that it's because it reaches deeper than just the idle man. It's not completely only describing a man who is physically inactive. It's describing also a man whose inner life is lazy, slack, and undisciplined. The word soul here is the Hebrew word nephes, and it carries the idea of the light, the inside part of a man. So the point is not only that an idle hand or a lazy person makes for an empty pantry. I think there's deeper than that. It's that an idle inner life produces outward ones. People that are lazy on the outside, it's because they're lazy on the inside, right? And you could have people that work hard and still kind of lazy. It's undisciplined in your life. And we have to be careful about that, because there's people that can be physically busy and still have an idle soul, because your desire is to not be doing what you ought to be doing. Slothfulness and laziness and idleness is not first a schedule problem, it's a soul problem. And listen, we ought to not be idle. You ought to have something to do with your time. Most of your time should not just be, if somebody said, what did you do today? You ought to have an answer for them. Even on days off and days like, I'm not doing anything today. Even your not doing anything today should be planned to a T, right? Like, how is that? Because otherwise we let vast amounts of our time go by and things aren't getting done and things aren't being taken care of and we don't even know where our time is going. Listen, if you get off and you get home 5, 6, I don't care what time you get home, what are you going to do for the next 3 or 4 hours? I'm not saying you can never take it easy. There's time and a place for all that. But there ought to be, I'm intentionally taking it easy. Not you just wake up 6 months later, I took it easy for 6 months, right? This is not an acceptable thing. It really is this, what do you spend your time doing? What is your time taken up with? And it's one thing, well, I spend all my time at work. You don't spend all your time at work. You may spend a lot of time at work, but you don't spend all your time at work. And so I'm maybe more concerned about what you're doing while you're not at work, or whatever the case. And really you should be looking inside your heart. If you have a slothful or idle problem, you should be looking inside your heart, because it's really a heart problem, ultimately. In Proverbs 13:4, it says it like this: the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the diligent shall be made flat. Proverbs 20 puts it like this: love not sleep, lest thou come to poverty. Open thine eyes, and thou shalt be satisfied with bread. Let's look at verse number 16 on in this. Verse number 16, it's kind of a verse that we've kind of bounced around about a few times in this chapter, but we'll take a look at it here. Verse number 16 says, he that keepeth the commandment keepeth his own soul, but he that despiseth his ways shall die. This word keepeth here means to guard it carefully by ordering one's conduct according to it. So listen, let's think about this. You can know the commandment without keeping it, right? And this is important for us, because I think this is where there's a connection between knowing things and doing them. And this is important because we know a lot of things, right? You know a lot of the Bible, you know a lot of verses, you know a lot of what God expects out of you. And so that's not where the problem is at. It is a rare, I look around at the room tonight, and I think you'd be hard pressed as a general rule, obviously I'm speaking in generalities, for me to preach a verse out of Proverbs, for me to preach a passage anywhere, to hear something that pastor said, and you'd be like, I did not know that God wanted me to do that. All of us have been in church plenty long enough to know what the commandments are. Does that make sense? Like, it's probably been a while since most of us sitting in this room was like, I didn't know God expected me to do that. And I'm talking about everything from the basic things to even some more of the nuanced things. Like, if I said God doesn't want you to be bitter, does that surprise anybody? No, you don't want my guess is most of y'all, I could give a list of what I feel like are commandments. And most of y'all are between all of y'all. Most of y'all could give me a verse for most of it, right? Yeah, there's a verse, I think it's in 1 Corinthians or Hebrews that talks about bitterness, right? And so the problem is not knowing the commandment. The problem is keeping the commandment. And honestly, I think that Proverbs really emphasizes this quite a bit. The commandments are right here. Listen, you could memorize the book of Proverbs and it wouldn't do you any good. You understand what I'm saying? Because your problem is not that you don't know what Proverbs expects out of you, right? So just because you could quote Proverbs, which I'm not do you any good, maybe slightly an overstatement, but you understand what I'm saying. It's more than just being able to recite commandments. What are you doing with what you know you ought to be doing? The word despiseth, it means to regard as insignificant, to treat with contempt, to make light of, to consider unworthy of attention. So you can know without keeping, you can understand without keeping. I would argue the same thing with this understand without keeping. I think it's going to be rare. I'm speaking to people with a very specific audience tonight. I don't think that most of us are going to find, I don't understand what God expects out of me. That's not the problem here. You know what he expects. You understand what he expects. I would even say that most of us could appreciate the wisdom of keeping it. Like, God wants me to, I'll just take something kind of simple and easy, come into church. Does everybody know that God expects you to come to church? Everybody shake your head. Everybody knows that. Does everybody understand what that means? Right? Everybody understands what that means. Do you understand why that's a good idea? Right? The Bible talks about exhorting one another and so much the more, let us consider one another and provoke one another good, right? There's all these benefits of coming to church, right? So you know that you should, you understand that you should, you even assent and understand why it's a good idea. But are we doing it like we ought to, right? Is that what we're doing? I picked one that most of us, generally speaking, aren't having an issue with. But what I'm saying is knowing it, understanding it, and even appreciating the reality does not take away the fact that you still have to be doing it. I would also argue you can despise without a single derogatory comment, right? You don't have to talk bad about it. You despise it just by not doing it. You can despise it while paying lip service to the commandment. We'll pick church attendance again. If I went around the room and said, do you think you should come to church? Do you think you should come to church? Everybody would say, yep. But then do you? Right. And then, so the despising is not saying, I think coming to church is stupid. That's not doing it is despising it enough. Your actions indicate what you're despising. The term here, despising his ways, he that despiseth his ways, it doesn't mean that the man openly hates the conduct. It means he's treating his life as something not worth watching carefully. Really, it's just a matter of what is important to you. What is a priority? We all have things that are important, and there's a certain level of what's most important, right? And depending on, what day of the week and what time it is, at 6 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, generally speaking, the most important thing is me making sure I get to work on time, right? There's a sense in which that's the most important thing. I get up early. I have a morning pretty start. I know what time I got to leave. I do all this to make sure that my priorities be met. But on Sundays, my priority is different. I'm making sure I'm at church. Now, church is always a bigger priority, and I think that's generally true here. But what I'm saying is we have all of these different priorities in life, and depending on what day of the week and what time, it's all being juggled around. But my question is, what's important to you? And we ought to be keeping the commandment with our soul. It's not just I'm coming to church because I'm supposed to come to church, to use that example. This is what my soul wants to do. I'm keeping this with my entire soul. Proverbs 15 puts it like this. Correction is, let's look at Proverbs 13. Whoso despiseth the word shall be destroyed, but he that feareth the commandment shall be rewarded. And that's what I want for Proverbs 16 puts it like this. The highway of the upright is to depart from evil. He that keepeth his way preserveth his soul. It really is just a matter of what our priorities are in our life. I hope I've given you something to think about tonight. Really just a matter of doing what we're supposed to be doing. Nothing I'm talking about on Wednesdays is, again, super profound. It's verse 12. It's listening to those that are in authority over us. It's not causing your parents grief. Wives not going home and picking fights. Being thankful for the wife that you have from the Lord. Not being lazy. Keeping the commandment. Having right priorities. Just simple stuff. In one sense, just kind of simple stuff. But we got to do it. We got to have the priorities right. I appreciate your attention.